Hello and welcome back to the Thematic Intelligence podcast. At Global Data's Thematic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Alex Blair, and today I'll be speaking to three cybersecurity experts about the crucial issue of voter data protection ahead of the UK elections, which will take place exactly a week from today, on Thursday the 4th of July. We'll get on to the upcoming UK elections in a second, but first I'd like to add in a caveat for context. Now, last year, the UK Electoral Commission admitted that a hostile cyber attack had accessed the names and addresses of 40 million voters registered between 2014 and 2022. Now, that period includes three general elections in 2015, 2017 and 2019, all of which the Conservative Party won, and of course it includes the Brexit referendum of 2016. Now, within the last 9 months, cyber attacks have targeted key UK institutions like the British Library, Royal Mail, and most recently the Ministry of Defence. Amid such turmoil, how on earth are UK citizens meant to feel secure about their voter data? I put the question to Richard Hummel, lead threat analyst at cybersecurity firm NETSCOUT.
Look, there's hacks everywhere, and every organization is probably going to experience something to the effect of having data compromised at one point or another. There's a conversation that we've had recently where it's not a matter of if you're going to get attacked, but when. And also the change of the security mindset over the years has been not that we can prevent everything from getting in, but how fast can we react to it? And how can we properly segment, isolate our system so that if somebody does get in, there's limited access to information. And that's really the space that we're in right now, is assume that somebody will get into your data set. Assume that somebody will compromise a system or asset somewhere, whether it's social engineering, whether it's using vulnerabilities, it's using exploitation. At some point in time, somebody will get in. So I think the general public needs to understand that these cyber threats are in the millions, the tens of millions, billions of attempts to get into these systems. The defender has to look across an entire platform. And if you're talking elections, how big is that infrastructure? How does that scale? Every single different demographic, every region, every province, every single asset that touches the internet is a risk that the defenders have to look at. Adversary only needs to get through one. So you have to have consistency across the entire space. And then you also have to deal with the human element, right? Which is typically the weakest link in a security. Did one person just not have their coffee that morning? They forgot to do something, and all of a sudden now there's this risk because they forgot to secure something, or they didn't do it the right way, or they didn't put right restrictions in place. And so, look, voters can look at this and be like, I don't really have any confidence here. But they have to realize this happens worldwide. It's not just the UK elections. It's the entire world is experiencing this issue and this onslaught from cyber adversaries. So we all really need to look at this holistically, that this is a problem across the globe.
Mm. And touching on it holistically, what are some of the other key elections that you guys have been monitoring that you've noticed a particular upswing in DDoS or other cybersecurity attacks in this year?
So we try to monitor most of these. In fact, I've worked with our PR agencies to get a list of major elections and what's happening across the globe so that we can keep our ear to the ground. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of the actor groups that are in the European area going after all of these countries through this election cycle. I mean, the UK is coming up, but France has already started. There's other different European nations that have already started. In fact, there was actor groups or hacktivists that came out and said, we are going to create this campaign. Join us to attack all of these different countries that are going through election cycles. So there's literally been a call to arms for these hacktivists to specifically go after assets and infrastructure.
Now, 2024 has been labelled the so-called year of elections, a massive convergence of election cycles in which roughly half of the world's voters have gone or will go to the polls. Based on his analysis of these other elections, whether it be in Mexico, India or the European Parliament, I asked Mark Ruchie, the Chief Information Security Officer at Entrust, what specific forms of electoral disruption he anticipated would target the UK elections next week.
There's different motives for different groups. There's groups who just want to discredit democratic institutions. Some of them don't care about cybersecurity attacks at all. They're just doing deep fakes. They're doing cheap fakes. Cheap fake is they're really not doing much, but think of it almost like a fast food industry for, that some of these groups like in Russia and others, they're just pushing this stuff out. They really don't care whether it works or not, but it is coming fast and furious. That makes it hard for us to be able to respond to. Then they're looking at, the people, the networks, the data. So again, it depends upon what level you're at. You still need to be worried about DDoS attacks. You're still sometimes seeing DDoS attacks in rather focused areas. And a DDoS attack might be where you're trying to, election day, trying to find out places to vote or trying to find out additional data. There's still account hijacking that you need to be worried about. These could be an official account for that. Somebody thinks that, that they're a local person is running, and that local person may be fairly lightweight when it comes to technology. That account could be hijacked, and it could be, again, crap that's getting spewed out. The voter, I think there was concern about the voter registration database attacks. To your point, a lot of that data has been exfiltrated. And, there was a concern earlier, I think, that data, that they might try and corrupt that data. That really hasn't happened. Rather, I think the adversaries are using that. They can use that for targeted voter harassment.
And targeted voter harassment being one side of it. But when you're talking there about corrupting that data, does that have the ability to influence the outcome of elections in the voter count?
If it causes enough friction in the system, yes. Today, I think there are backups. There's, not to go down to detail, but, if they have immutable backups of voter registration databases, probably less likely. But some of these people, their objective is just to cause friction. And there's enough friction to cause you or me to walk away. Suddenly that line, which 4 years ago took you 10 minutes, now is taking you an hour because, the database has been corrupted, and the local election officials are trying to verify that it's you, Alex Blair. A certain percentage of us are going to turn around and walk away because there's too much friction, too much time. And I think that's probably the more likely scenario. I mean, yeah, if a voter registration database was completely corrupted and they did not have an immutable backup, and they didn't have it printed off at the local level, that could cause that could even cause an election to be delayed, quite frankly. But I don't see that as likely at this point.
Rob Dartnall, CEO and Director of Intelligence for SecAlliance, then weighed in with his thoughts on what hacked UK voter data could potentially be used for.
Yeah, so most of that's going to fall under information operations. It may be as well that you could go one step further and actually, by compromising organizations and using those organizations as a mouthpiece, so putting out information via their domains and their websites, or using their email distribution lists, things like that. That's one thing. Understanding, and this was kind of the point around the UK voter data, which was a little bit lacking from some of the information that was out there, is yes, a lot of that stuff might be open source, but the reason we call China the Great Hoover of China rather than the Great Wall of China in the cyber domain is actually when you pull up all of that information and then you aggregate it with other information, and then you just stick, even as we move forward into the world of large language models, you start putting things on top of that. One of the areas that a lot of us are concerned about, how you can use LLMs to profile individuals and to profile sectors of people within communities a lot quicker and a lot easier. So you can write very personalized campaigns against groups of individuals very easily. We use it ourselves when we're doing red teaming attacks. We certainly know threat actors are developing that capability as well. So yes, a lot of that sits within information operations, but certainly within the cyber domain as well. In the future, it's going to be far more valuable than it necessarily is now, because it's just going to be so much more easily exploited.
Now, in the UK, the main cybersecurity body is known as the NCSC, or National Cybersecurity Centre. I then asked Rob what specific measures the NCSC is implementing against cyber attacks this election.
I think the list is long. I think there's a lot to be done with law enforcement. It's been, really reassuring the last few months to hear what different law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the UK, working with Europol and other agencies in Europe. It's been a long time coming. We've really needed those doors kicking down of some of those operators, but also it's fine taking on ransomware operators or others. But you've got to take out those supporting infrastructure providers, the hosting providers, all of those elements which they rely on, and that's important. There's a lot of diplomatic pressure that needs to happen, but when one of those main offensive actors is someone like Russia or somebody like China, diplomatic efforts are just going to be incredibly limited.
I'm just going to say, in that case, then how do you target the infrastructure if diplomacy's not effective?
Well, that's the problem. If you are limited on the offensive capabilities, such as those soft power elements, then you've really got to focus on the defensive elements. And this is where we need to come in. So within the UK, we have some great frameworks, right? We have things like CBEST, which is an intelligence-led red teaming framework designed to, help secure banks, which is, one of the most important parts of our economies. We have that across government as well. Frameworks like that are world leading. But what we really need to do is just build more of those frameworks across critical infrastructure and then make frameworks that are applicable for just all business as a whole. And just starting to build in the requirements for all business to have a legal level of cybersecurity resilience. And also one thing that, within Crest, but also with the Cyber Up campaign, me personally, and a lot of others have been working really hard on the past few years is persuading the government to update the Computer Misuse Act, which was written in 1990. So 34 years ago, wasn't really built for the digital age. And, we've been looking forward for the government to bring forth some kind of, statutory defense into that law. So it allows people like me and my team to do much more offensive research, to actually take a bit of a leading role. Like other countries do it in Europe, they don't have the same restrictions as we have here in the UK.
I then went back to Richard Hummel to ask more about the specific perpetrators behind electoral cyber attacks. Are we talking Russian-sponsored or affiliated activists, like no name?
We'll call them arms-length Russian hacktivists. Now, it's always notoriously very difficult to attribute DDoS hacktivists because by the very nature of DDoS, it's anonymous. But the fact that a lot of the hacktivists align to Russian ideology, the fact that they're going after opponents, they're going after countries that the hacktivists will claim have Russophobia. And so they're aligned to Russian ideals. Now, are they sponsored by the Russian government? Are they actual activists within the Russian government? Nobody knows. But we do know that they're aligning very closely to the politics of Russia specifically, or North Korea or China, right? And so they'll typically align to their ideology, and then they'll go after anybody opposed to that.
For context and for the record, can you name some of the key players, some of the key hacktivist groups who have been part of this?
So the primary group right now that's active, launching more attacks as far as I'm tracking than any other, is No Name 57. And so they're probably the most structured, sophisticated DDoS hacktivists I've seen probably ever. Just the way they do things, the way they run their infrastructure, the way that they run their operations, how they attack their targets, all of that stuff speaks to a sophistication that we haven't seen before. You also have Russian Cyber Army, who actually coincides a lot of the targets in terms of who they go after with No Name 57. So again, Russia, right? And then you also have Anonymous Sudan, who's typically active. Now, Anonymous Sudan is very different than No Name. Not super sophisticated, but when they do a call to arms, they'll typically rope in a bunch of hacktivists and they'll all go after a particular country together. And so they might have a list of 10 websites, but when Anonymous Sudan says we're going to target these 10 websites, they'll basically target any website belonging to any company, organization, entity for that industry, for that country. So you actually see the whole country spike in terms of DDoS attacks. And so, these are several of them that are active right now, but there's nearly 300 DDoS hacktivists active right now in the world, which is insane because 5 years ago, you would be shocked to see 3 major DDoS hacktivists running at any given time. And now we're talking about nearly 300. And so what we're seeing right now, we're actually tracking this across Germany, across France, across various other countries. We're seeing a flood of attacks, not just in terms of the sheer count, but even adversaries claiming victor in taking some of these things down. And so it is happening and it is coming in waves. So I can't give you like an accurate count, But I can tell you that when No Name sets their targets on somebody, we're talking attacks in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, over the course of several weeks. So they will just continually bombard with attacks. Anonymous Sudan, same thing. You'll see, if you recall, probably 4 or 5 months ago, French airlines were attacked. And that was Anonymous Sudan said, we're going to go after the French airline system. We saw an entire spike for the whole country. So in let's just say on a typical day, we would see 200 attacks. We saw like 500 or 600 attacks in that one day.
Now, while the UK government refused to name the hostile actor behind the Ministry of Defence hack in May, most analysts said it was covered in Chinese fingerprints. I went back to Mark Ruchie to ask how nation-state cyber attacks on voter data and government institutions vary.
That is a good question, because traditionally you had the Chinese, the People's Republic of China, specialized in stealing confidential data for economic purposes. I mean, if you go back 25 years, that's what they specialize in. They still have large groups that specialize in that. Russia, Iran, a little bit more, control of people and subjects, but also a little bit of that. North Korea was more akin to traditionally to People's Republic of China, trying to look for economic gain. I think overwhelming, it's still the Russian side of it is still trying to again, they don't care at what level they're causing chaos and distrust in the democratic institution. But clearly this connection between Russia and China, between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, has become stronger at all levels.
Geopolitical underpinnings aside, concerns linger about the protection of UK voter data. All eyes now turn to next week's election and how the NCSC, UK government and related bodies ensure the sensitive personal information of UK citizens remains confidential. Thanks to you all for listening, and from us in Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.